I am so glad to be here today to speak with my colleague, Judy Talaugon, for our first episode of the second season of Beyond Borders. And our very special guest today is Sarah Sophie Flicker. And
Mhm.
I would like to defer to Judy, who I have been so honored to work with and learn from in so many ways as we've been producing this show together, and who has known Sarah for a very long time now. So I think it's only appropriate for you to share some of your history with us and what you have in common and why we feel like Sarah is such an important guest to have on this show.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha. Yes, this is probably 30 some odd years later. Right. But
If
what do you think? Was it 32, 33? She was a
it
baby.
might,
This is the gorgeous part of my stories with Sarah Sophie Flicker is that, I want to say that it was a beautiful, gorgeous, glamorous moment in music, culture, and art. Sarah was all of a teen, if I may, just that's,
I
yeah,
was.
yeah, a teen. My children grew up in that same scene. It was quite a scene. It wasn't just, barbecues and lake visits. It was really a scene in San Francisco, and it was hotcakes. And Sarah was, if you will, sort of married into the family, and we were married into hers. Wonderful mother. Arnella is an author. And is Arnella still with us? I apologize for not
She
being able
is, yeah.
to.
She's in
Gorgeous.
Denmark, beating the Democratic Socialist drum louder than ever.
Absolutely. Our connections go deep politically. Father is also a basic, really human rights, civil rights, legal witness and attorney. So we go back. We go back many Christmases and many holidays. But I want to say that, what I really want to sort of put an exclamation mark for Sarah, too, is that it was during the Rodney King uprising that
Hmm.
really Sarah's generation and Sarah's entire scene came forward. And for me, as an activist, as an organizer that also would frequent the clubs and participate and just was part of the scene as well. So I wanted to punctuate our acquaintance as becoming, really tied into an incredible moment in
Mm.
history in San Francisco's, kind of underground, subterranean, very, very mixed party scene. So, Sarah, I don't know if you can add to that introduction and what part of your life, but Sarah does come from a music, sort of theater
Hmm.
training as well. So, my children are, addicted to theater. So, anyway,
So your paths crossed not only because of family, but I think we're strengthened by a certain amount of activism, if I'm reading this correctly. And I think you used a term earlier this morning with me, Judy. You talked about child activism and, the children of activists, basically, and how some of them grow up. And I just wanted to add that Sarah, she's talking about San Francisco, but I believe that you're now in Brooklyn.
I am in Brooklyn now. I was born in Denmark to a Danish mother and an American father, but my dad moved to Denmark for a while when I was born. Both really principled, I would say, like incredibly, you can't parent perfectly, as I've found as a parent of 3 kids now, but you can instill your kids with a principle. And the one thing about especially my mother is she is unwavering and unapologetic in her beliefs, and that's something she passed on to me that I'm so grateful for. I moved to California when I was 5, and then when I was about, I don't know, 14, I had been dancing and doing theater, and I was commuting to San Francisco from Palo Alto to take ballet 5 times a week. And I became a teenager, and I was like, ooh, I want to go to clubs and flirt and so I would play hooky from ballet, and I would go to Haight Street, and I met all these incredible people who worked at Wasteland, and through that became enmeshed in the music scene at a very young age. I did have my friends. I remember it so clearly. I remember her name and everything. I had her expired passport, and that's how I would get into nightclubs. And in that process, I met all these musicians. And to Judy's point, not only was it just the coolest scene ever because, on the one hand, you'd be with the heavy metal scene, but that was also part of the hip hop scene, which was also part of the funk scene, which was also part of like the jazz scene. And not only that, but like we were bending gender so hard at that time and in such a sort of before the curve kind of way. Like when I think, it's sometimes things that are happening now can be shocking to me, even though I know better than to be shocked by anything. But when it was so not weird for all of us to have trans friends, to have non-binary friends, and of course, Judy can speak to all the ways in which, gender has historically been bent in so many, indigenous cultures. And so it was just so foundational for me. And then to meet Judy at that time, not to mention, AIDS was in full force in San Francisco. So to meet Judy at that time, to have sick friends, to be, finding my identity in this moment. I think Judy and I met probably for the first time when I was, well, I met your family for the first time when I was around 14. And then I became involved with a family member when I was almost 18, I think. And in retrospect, my kids are always like, why did your parents let you do that? And
I'm
honestly,
just saying that in recognition or, understanding with a similar background.
Yes.
yeah, and it
Oh,
just,
yes.
of course, it was part of the times, but also
Hmm.
I couldn't have landed in a better place. And I understand how lucky I am because it could have gone in a million different directions. But to land, in the lap of this family, I'm an only child, I don't have any kind of family. And to land with this family and then to have Judy as my mentor and to guide me through becoming an activist and an organizer, taking care of sick friends, joining ACT UP, all these things, meeting all the people at the Bearded Lady. Like, I don't know what my life would have been like if I hadn't met Judy, honestly. So, Judy is one of the most important people in my life.
Thank you. Absolutely.
That's
No, I
quite a
bet.
tribute. And I think that if we could talk a little more about the activism, because
Mhm.
it's not just that I mean, it's been significant what you've done in that arena. And I think if I'm understanding just from what I've seen and what I've looked at about your history, I think that maybe the women's, I don't want to just say women's movement, because in a way that seems like a tired phrase, but I think it's been something foremost in your work, and you've certainly expressed pride in the Women's March. And so I'd like to just hear from you what's been your motivation maybe and where it's led you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The women's movement is not the thing, except for the fact that as I was, you know, becoming radicalized by Judy in the best way possible, I also was starting to at Mills College and was very lucky to be there at a time where that school was I mean, I imagine probably the most radical feminist education you could
Absolutely.
have. And so I just remember like the first class I took was about it was Black feminist thought was the first
Hmm.
class I took. And so I was never, feminism to me was always intersectional and it was always radical. And so while I can't really align with a lot of what I think has been a problem for feminism in the last 15, 20 years, I've been adjacent to it and I understand it. And I've, for better or for worse, participated in it in some ways with the Women's March and other things. My relationship to it is funny. And also, I can say, as someone who's been organizing for the, better part of the last 3 decades, there are so few men that I've worked with, at least cis straight men that I've worked with, that it is a woman's movement,
It is.
or at least it's a femme movement, or
Yeah,
it's
the family.
a
Yeah.
Can
feminine
we
movement.
drill a little deeper into that, because
You know,
I said that, and you hinted that in a way there's something problematical there, but I don't think we're actually
and I,
naming it. I'd like
yeah,
to name what is the problem in there with that.
what I want to interject, I want to say that what a, this is what's so wonderful about this particular generation Sarah represents. This was a moment in time where folks were barely in their, not even in their 20s. They were marching with me. They were showing up at land actions. They were not just taking the moniker of feminist. Sarah would call and say, "There's issues in the studies and we need your support." This is a child that's just like got right in up in it and said, we need to radicalize, we need to organize, we need to support, the director of this department, really understood, which I feel like a lot of times in the quote unquote feminist movement of the new, it hasn't been that kind of engagement. There hasn't been that kind of commitment.
And
And
is that a
or
lack of willingness to bring together just general oppression with women's rights? I mean, somehow I think what you might be hinting at, Sarah, is this sort of white woman's feminism. And I don't like to call it that, even because I don't think it's only white women who get sort of duped into that type
Mm,
of behavior. I think it's more like,
capitalist.
not to excuse white women, but there's sort of this consumerist even behavior that's
Ye-
counter to, respecting the earth, which, if we did that, maybe we could respect women more as well. But so I think there's this sort of refusal to acknowledge that violence because of the part that our positions play in
mhm.
the violence. Like, we have to acknowledge, all of us, who have a car or live in a house or buy something in a can, we all
Or
have to
use Amazon.
acknowledge the
Yeah.
violence in that. It's inherent
Mhm.
in the way
Mhm.
we're living. And I'm wondering if that's like the disconnect when we have this difficulty talking about feminism, when really I don't like, I don't have any trouble talking about women's rights, and yet there's this sort of thing in the air that hangs there.
I've been thinking about it quite a bit because I've been, for the last 10 years, I just have felt that the movement as a whole has been off course, for longer than that. But, specifically, I'm thinking like maybe 15 years, because I think the issue is capitalism. And I think, on the one hand, we're in the middle of such an intense backlash. So, backlashes only happen when you're doing something kind of right, so
Mm.
that's why we're seeing the backlash, you know, against women, against Black people, against, I think there's a backlash for sure after 2020. But where I think it specifically started to go wrong, or at least this is a part of it, is sort of the uplift of this idea that, the girl bossness of it all, and the idea that I think that it's very easy for white women to fall into, which is this idea that if you're adjacent to power, that's better than not being near power at all. But what happens when you're adjacent to power in a system that is only meant, for straight white men, if we're naming it? You can't participate in that and further the cause. So, like this whole sort of lionization of women CEOs, or even,
Right.
yes.
a woman president being important, over time I've come to find that those are actually pretty regressive ideas, and not what we should be rallying around, and another part of it is, I think, you know there's this huge backlash against Me Too right now, and this feeling that Me Too went too far,
Mm.
which I find
That's
hilarious.
Right.
crazy.
Hilarious. But that said, I was never comfortable with the whole cancel culture thing. And that's another thing that I think sort of derailed all of us, and right now, I think misogyny, at least in my lifetime, is at an all-time high. And I can see it with my kids, my daughter especially, from what she tells me, and you can just see it in the culture. And I also just don't think that the kids are buying the whole, girl boss, CEO empowerment feminism, because at the end of the day, it's like it's about solidarity and it's about working together and working with men, obviously. and
Mm-hmm.
and while I'm disappointed in men as a whole, full stop, I also understand the ways in which they haven't been invited into the conversation, and we have to find a better way to balance
Absolutely,
that.
absolutely. I'm with you on that, and I encourage. I think that we have two sons between us, right? Each of us,
No, we have four
four
sons
sons
between
between
us.
us.
Yeah.
And I know that, and I want to share with the audience and with Martha. Through time, it's maybe been 30 something years that we've actually marched on anything in the physical together, but we have definitely organized
Hmm.
on some hardcore concrete issues that linger to this day, and it is race capitalism that
Hmm.
confuses us all. But when I've gotten an email or a little note from Sarah requesting just a little bit of advice, what do we do? What is going on with child rearing in this time, revolution, or this time of change, or this time of conflict? And, or maybe it was just a quiet time that I would get a little question from Sarah. And I always thought that at some point, if the benefit to the hard work that we do and the commitment that we have to our purpose as organizers, if our children could be participants somehow, but without any real lessons through pain and punishment, coercion or shame. That's me and Sarah. I really want to just share that.
Mm.
So anytime I had to lend advice, I was challenged because I knew I was speaking to a real, matriarch here. I knew I was speaking to the divine core of what a woman truly is in terms of leadership. Truly understands that there's always openness and meaning. So how do you teach that to your children so that they
Mhm.
don't squish, us into concepts and categories that we're open and strong that
Hmm.
way and
Hmm.
powerful in our openness and the mystery. But it's a hard lesson. We've come this far, and now our children are kind of actually ready for this lesson. And I feel extra blessed. I really do have our children receive this information. I'm excited to meet Sarah's, all three of them, you know.
Can't.
But I get to have this, and I do, audience, get to have this conversation with Martha as well. We are raising the next generation, and we are feeling positive, challenged,
Hmm.
lost at some up for answers. But we have evidence, my sisters. We have real lived evidence of that this could be a kinder and fundamentally, profoundly loving world. We've come through with some of
Hmm.
that practice, true praxis. I want to kind of open it up again to Sarah. I mean, when we talk about that sort of hotbed of cultural, it was a cultural hub. It truly
Hmm.
was. People were
Hmm.
speaking truth on stage through hip hop. It was an implosion. Sarah was at the time, again, maritally, it was just such a beautiful, what a wonderful influence Sarah had on my heavy metal family. We were related to Kirk Hammett of Metallica, who is also deep in my soul, our
Hmm.
soulmate. Supported the 1992 campaign that I participated with other women in organizing the anti Columbus, Indigenous Peoples Day, Berkeley thing back in 1992. The pinnacle, the real highlight of my time with Sarah and Kirk, and Kirk was so deeply influenced by this womanness about him that countered all of the
Hmm.
hierarchical bullshit in world. You got to know Kirk to know this. This power structure was not his gig, man. He just loved this vibe, and Sarah brought more femme into the community of
You
heavy
can
metal
count on
band.
me to do that.
Oh, it was so gorgeous. Anyway, he was enhanced and his library grew and he supported this movement. And so I just want to say that. Thank you, Sarah, so much.
Oh my God. And two, thank you. And two, I just also want to say, because as we started saying earlier, there's something inherently questionable about a very young woman running off with a somewhat older heavy metal guy, and things could have gone in a whole bunch of different directions. And I am just so lucky that he is him and you guys are you guys, because he set a standard for me. And I hope he knows this, that he set a standard for me that I have never fallen below. And I've been treated incredibly well by everyone I've been in a relationship, be it a woman, man, a non-binary person, because he showed me very early on that that was possible. And my husband, who I'm married to now, is in that lineage of those kind of men. And it's why I don't dismiss men at all, and I just wish that they were more involved, and I think we need to meet them a little bit more where they're at. And raising boys, as Judy knows, it's I was so scared. I was so scared because, I don't even, like I said, I don't hang out with a ton of men. I certainly don't work with a ton of straight men. But wow, being a mother to boys is such a gift, and they are so different, and it's such a spectrum, just like anything, but I'm learning so much from them. And I do believe that the youth is the future. I also believe, for some reason, I don't know, maybe it's just me, and I wonder how you both feel about this, but I'm not comfortable. I remember after the Parkland shooting and those kids doing what they were doing, and I know some of them and have kept in touch with them. They shouldn't have had to do that. Like we have not, we haven't finished our job, and I don't want it to be their job to do this. And I know that my daughter especially bristles at this idea, like, oh, the youth are gonna fix it. It's like, no, no,
No,
no,
no,
we
no, no.
broke this. We
Yeah,
broke
yeah.
this, or
Thank you.
we didn't mend it in the way
Yeah,
that we had hoped. And I'm committed to mending it, not just for them, but for their kids. I don't even know if I answered a single question you just asked.
yeah.
Well,
This
I
is
think that
so.
brings us to present day
Hmm.
activism and the idea. I did want to understand better, our listeners to understand though better, because I brought up the Women's March on
Mm.
Washington, and maybe we could use that to kind of come to some of your present day activities.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'd like to know really what was your role in that, and maybe your perspective now, because it sounds like you've had a lot of thoughts since that time.
I have. I'll just say, leading up to the Women's March, I did all sorts of things, but one of the main things was I was the creative director of a political theater group called the Citizens Band in New York, which we continued. We had it going for 12 years, which is sort of phenomenal. And I do feel like not only did that immerse me in the power of culture organizing, which is like pretty much exclusively what I do now, but I also learned from that the ways in which power culture is always upstream of policy. And so I'm so much more interested in influencing things however I can, or shaping things however I can, leading with joy and art and truth to power, but in a beautiful way that I think people can hear in a way that they can't always hear in a more dogmatic tone. I've worked for the last 30 some odd years on abortion, because I had an abortion when I was really young, and I wanted that. I wanted that I wanted everyone to have that ability. And I know that I wouldn't be the person I am now if I hadn't been able to access that abortion when I was a teenager. So, I had been doing all sorts of organizing, in California and in New York.
Hmm.
And in 2016, I had, one of the things we did for about 20 years that I still do, but this group keeps it going without me, is just getting people involved in canvassing for, people who are campaigning, who are on the right side
Yes.
of the issues we care about. So, on that election night, I had supported Bernie until the primary, and then I did go straight into supporting Hillary, and that was interesting and hard and challenging, and I learned a lot. And I had organized 300 people to go to Pennsylvania to knock doors. So we were in Pennsylvania and we lost. And I just remember the next morning, my friend Michael Skolnick, who is a wonderful straight male white organizer, and I can count them on one hand. I've worked with him for about 15 years. He called me and he said, will you host, I host a lot of like salons and political events at my house.
Yes.
He said, will you host, a come to Jesus meeting about this election, and let's just invite everyone we know who's doing something important and who's a top-notch organizer, and let's go. And so that was Wednesday, and then Thursday I had about 100 people at my house, and I just remember it was like so wild because it was like the Working Families Party, who I work with all the time, but it was also like people who had worked for Hillary, and it was people who had worked for Bernie, and it was, housing organizations and racial justice and, all these different people. And I also remember that was the night that Leonard Cohen died. I just don't know why I remember that, but I do. And I remember looking at my phone, there were all these messages and people were saying, have you seen these posts on Facebook about marching on Washington, which I hadn't seen. The next day I get a call from Michael Skolnick again, who's like, I've tapped you and a handful of my, favorite women organizers. And these people who have put this on Facebook haven't organized before. We need you guys to come in. So I'm suddenly, working with Linda Sarsour, who I'd worked with before and who I will follow anywhere. And if anyone says a word about Linda that isn't anything but like praise, I lose my mind. Like, she's just one person who has my heart forever. And so I was with Linda and Tamika Mallory and Carmen Perez, and then I met Paula Mendoza, who at the time, was Michael's partner, but they're great, but not a couple anymore. Ginny Suss, Alyssa Klein, Nantasha Williams, just like this. There was about 25 of us. And we were the national organizing team of the Women's March, along with these, women who had put it on Facebook. And the woman who had put this idea on Facebook had a fantastic idea. In retrospect, I really wish we had done it before the inauguration, but that's neither here nor there. But, it was hard. It was hard because we had 8 weeks to pull this thing together. And gratefully, we were working out of the Gathering for Justice, which was Carmen Perez's office, which was Harry Belafonte's office. And he was there, which was why, and and we were surrounded by, tell me if this is more information than you wanted. It was just
Tell your
so
story.
incredible. And I don't feel like people know this story. We were, I just remember I'd be like, we were all trying to take calls, so I'd go into like a closet and I'd be in this closet taking a call with like Madonna's manager, and I'd be just sort of looking at everything, and there'd be these piles of photo negatives. And over the weeks, I would look through them and it would just be like the raw negative of the March on Washington, or like some random picture of Eartha Kitt, or something with Mr. B. We called Harry Belafonte Mr. B. Something he had done where I'm just like, I can't believe I'm immersed in this. And he would just be sitting in the corner and he would just pipe in every once in a while. And I remember one time we were talking about something and someone said, oh, well, that's just preaching to the choir. And he just says really quietly, sometimes you have to preach to the choir if you want them to keep on singing. And I was like, oh, it's just, and then, like Gloria Steinem would roll in, and I remember her saying, because there was a lot of tension between, the white women who were organizing and who didn't have maybe as much experience, and, more seasoned organizers who were predominantly Black and brown women. And, I sort of found myself being a bridge as much as I could, and not succeeding a lot of the time, but succeeding sometimes. It's one of the most important things I've ever done. And it's something that's also kind of embarrassing because it didn't do what I wanted it to do. And I just remember.
What part of that, when you say embarrassing, what part of that is embarrassing?
Linda and I talk about this all the
Yeah.
time, actually. It's like, we were sort of thrown into this moment, and I wouldn't have changed a thing about it. But to have millions of people ready to do something, and we didn't have the capacity or the time to strategize around what the next steps would be to keep those millions of people engaged and clearly organize them, I feel like that was a real missed opportunity.
Mm.
And I also just remember standing on the stage in DC because, we were all in DC, but we had been organizing nationally and internationally, and we had, come up with this idea of the sister marches, which was really inspired by Elder Bernice King, who
Mhm.
had amazingly gotten on a call with us really early on, and she had sent us the binder from the March on Washington and how they organized that. And that's like a whole other story, because that was a moment where you're like, oh wow, they organ that it that took over a year to
Yeah.
organize. And that was because the internet didn't exist,
Right.
and
Mm.
and social media didn't exist. And one of the things I did at the Women's March, again, for better or worse, because it's hard to know, Alyssa Klein and I just started all the social media pages, and we built them from like 0 to 1 million in a few weeks. And that was powerful. And also, like, I hate it. So,
Mm.
it's just, and I just remember standing on the stage that day and looking out at 1.2 million people in DC, and thinking, like, we're too late. This is too late. Like, where were these people a year ago? Where were they 6 months ago? And I just also, for the record, want to say we had nothing to do with the pussy hats. Like,
Yeah.
that was,
Yeah.
I was like, those, I just remember Paola and I being like, wow, those are the ugliest hats I've ever seen in my entire life. And like, so culturally off, not meeting the mark. And yet I'm glad that happened. And it was kind of amazing that it happened, to like be there at 3 in the morning in DC setting up the stage, and all of a sudden these trucks roll in with these garbage bags full of these pink fucking pussy hats that
Oh, wow.
that all these women had knitted all over the world and all over the country. And like, it's beautiful in one sense, and like, so, like, you want to like hide under a rock in another sense. So, it's just like the whole thing. That's
Break
just a
that
good
down
example.
for the women who really felt proud when wearing those pussy hats. Break that down, the part that made you want to hide under a rock.
Just the pinkness and the whiteness of it, I guess. And like, and at the same time, like, wow, what an amazing feat of organizing they did. And
Mm.
to allow people who couldn't march for whatever reason, and all these elders who wanted to
Thank you.
participate, like, what a beautiful thing for them to be able to contribute. So it's like, just like anything,
Mhm.
you're of two minds about it. But
I love this is the Sarah that I've always known, and I know it sounds really trite, but really the continuity of principle and delivery. I believe when you say, you know, there could have been more. I feel so much like there was no continuance. And that's what I came out of with 92. I felt like
mm,
a lot was usurped, a lot of, there was no pink hats, but
Mm.
certainly a huge marketplace came in and took over. And it was taken over also by big shades and long braids. It kind of kicked us women to the side. And these
mm,
fancy guys,
For
took
for our
center stage.
listeners who wanna really understand what you're talking about with 1992, you do have a
Yes,
new book out called
yes,
Tribunal Rising,
yes,
of
I
which
do.
you
which I
are
just
one of the
ordered.
editors, and they should they can delve deeper into what that was all
Yes,
about in this book,
yes,
Tribunal Rising, with
yes,
Judy
absolutely.
edited by Judy Talaugon and Angela Marino,
Yes.
correct? Yes.
Yes, correct.
Who we hope to have on this show at a future time.
I'm bringing guests that have worked with me and organized with me, and that's what's going on. And Sarah does, and I don't blame Arrow for being really annoyed with the youth movement kind of talk, okay? But Sarah did represent a new form of youth organizing. It was very radicalized and it was very deep.
Mm.
We did not have the internet like we do now, so you see, what people need to understand is that I believe that Sarah has continued. my love. I think you've continued to organize with the choir, with with and sort of it was been very generative to do the stage, bring guerrilla theater and beautiful cabaret forward.
which
For
some of that I've seen online, and
oh, it's
I to
continues.
bring it forward from the Women's March and the Pussy
Yeah,
Hats.
continues.
Does the FCC let you say that? I've got to check if Pussy Hats, if
I
you
know,
can
I
say
did
that.
swear to. I'm
That's
sorry. I
quite
got a
all
lot of
right.
emails.
There is such a thing as a beep. But, I also saw my old friend Sarah Flicker in your I mean, not Sarah Flicker, I'm sorry, Sarah Jones in your living room. We were
Oh,
sort of in the same milieu in the '90s spoken word scene, and,
Mm-hmm.
our paths crossed quite often. I think I had her on the radio at WBAI at the time. But she was in your living room campaigning for Mamdani,
Zoran, yeah.
and maybe you wanna talk a bit about
please.
those
Oh,
activities.
I do, because it's given me such
Uh-huh.
life, this whole thing. And Sarah, and I knew I recognized your name, Martha, so that explains a lot.
So funny.
Sarah and I have been friends. I met her when I was pregnant with my daughter. So we've been friends for 18 years, a little
Mm.
bit longer. And she's a great, you should have her
An
on the show. I mean,
amazing
she's amazing. I
talent.
mean, what a
Yes.
great, and she just organizes and works, through these characters in such an incredible way.
But I'll say
Um,
one more thing about her before you take over, which is that I always admired how people followed Sarah. She had a show, and she had a day job at the time when she first actually started doing these shows with all the different voices. Everybody in the entire office would come to see her. She was so good at just bringing people along. She has an extreme talent at that, both on
sh
stage and off stage.
yeah. And also just what a great person and what a good friend, so we love Sarah Jones. I feel like the Mamdani campaign has been a bit of a full circle moment for a lot of people. It's funny, I saw Linda 2 nights ago. I had an event for the Justice Democrats, who I love, who are a radical, electoral politics group, and but they've tapped pretty much everyone from the Squad and Jamal Bowman, and
Yes.
they're just rad and amazing.
Yes.
And Linda and I were talking about it, and I think, like, the thing that's been so beautiful about it is, I remember Linda saying to me, like, a couple years ago, like, this kid Zoran is, amazing. And I would hear about him, and he was on the city council doing incredible work with the taxi drivers and the medallions and hunger striking and winning, and just wonderful work. And I was at a bar, maybe a year and some change ago, and I'm sitting next to this guy, and he introduces himself to me, and it's Zoran, and he gives me his phone number, and he's like, I'm thinking about running for mayor. And I was like, okay, kid. And so I said to Linda, I was like, I think I met your friend Zoran. And she's like, yeah, he might run for mayor. And I was like, well, what do you think? And she's like, I think he can do it. But we were both kind of laughing. But, I was an early adopter, and I think I threw one of the first house parties for him, and which we called a friend raiser, because they had already met their fundraising goal at that point, but he was still like at 1% in the polls or something like that. But it was incredible, because I watched him turn, like, this man can walk into a room of people who are completely dubious of him, whether it's Donald Trump or a
Right.
bunch of, like, girl bosses, and he can turn them in the course of that meeting. Not that I think he's turned Donald Trump, but I do think he charmed the pants off of him. And so it's a few things that I think have, like, really solidified ideas I've had, and really made them real. And one of them is that if I really think about, where does feminism get in trouble, for example? We get in trouble in movements when we aren't consistent, when we aren't principled, when we don't have a moral framework that we are, like, adherent to, and when we apologize or back off of things that we know we need to be pushing for. And what I've watched Soron do and what I've watched his team do, it's not his great social media, although that didn't hurt, because he has a phenomenal comms team. Like, these people are geniuses. But those social media things that everyone, loves to say are the reason he won, they aren't the reason he won.
Yeah.
But they are an extension of his consistency, his kindness, his completely unwavering steadfastness to like a real moral framework. And also just like, for example, never apologizing for being a democratic socialist, never, instead, like trying to listen to what it is that people are afraid of. And he's a phenomenal listener. Like, we could all learn from his listening skills, listening to what people are afraid of, and then doing our best to like explain what it is that we're fighting for, and how like maybe they don't have a reason to be afraid of democratic socialism, or maybe they don't have a reason to be afraid of a rent freeze, or whatever it is that's like freaking people out. He listens, and then he talks about it, and he doesn't talk down to people, and he doesn't lecture them, but he shows them that he's heard them and that what they're saying is important. And I think, politicians in general, barring a small handful, and movements in general, and the Democratic Party in particular, should learn, beyond just the word affordability. Like, it's so annoying to hear that word, just like, it's not a word, you guys. It's not a video.
Yeah.
It's a consistency and a steadfastness and a principled, and having a point of view and not being afraid to have a point of view, and having a point of view that sometimes can scare people and maybe hurt them a little bit, but presenting it in a way that's like less scary, and for him to do that.
Humor is a part of that.
Yeah.
Right.
And joy.
Right. And
that was the other thing is, after the Women's March, we were so tired and depleted and the center of everyone's attention in a way that nobody wanted.
Right.
And Linda was just getting attacked left, right, and center in this scare, to have the president and the president's children naming her and going after her on social media and truly risking her safety was so scary and so disheartening. And so, a few of us were like, well, what do we know that's healing? What do we know that like brings people together? What do we know is something that builds community really effortlessly? And that's singing together. Yeah. So I was like, does anyone want to come over and sing together? And everyone was like, you dork, what are you talking about? No. And I was like, no, please just roll with me on this. And thank God I work with this phenomenal culture organizer named Nalini Stamp. She's head of arts and culture at the Working Families Party. We've known each other since Occupy. She's one of the founders and leaders of Occupy. She gets it, and so Nell and I were like, no, we're going to do this. And then Ginny Suss, who we work with, she started in music. She was the tour manager for The Roots. She started OK Player and OK Africa with them. And then we sort of grabbed her and pulled her into the Women's March. And then the poor thing has been organizing with us ever since and roping in, I know a certain, oh my God, I could go so off in so many, if I get off track, reel me back.
She's so good there,
Is
yes.
a real thing. Like the beauty of Judy and her family and exposing me to like this whole world of entertainment that I really have stuck with since then. And also really showing me the dark underside of fame and how corrosive that is and how unhealthy it is. I actually think that's like such a lesson that I wish so many young people
that the motivation about what you're doing is extremely important, right? Because if you want to be famous or just want to be rich, there's a lot of pitfalls to that,
And the fascination and obsession around that has just gotten so extreme. And then, with social media and influencers, it's just worse than ever. And I just feel so lucky that that's something I saw early on, and I thought, I don't want that. And anytime I've been
Sure, that,
tapped on
coming back around to your statement about culture being
yeah, so it's like,
upstream of policy. And I'm
and so,
wondering, what do you think? I mean, what's our future here in New York? I'm in Harlem, you're in Brooklyn.
oh, hi, yay.
What's our future coming up under Mamdani for arts creators? How
Yeah.
is that going to be? How are we going to see that manifest, do you think?
I mean, I can't totally say other than I hope we get Judy to move to New York.
Yes.
But okay, good.
Yeah.
I think, so on, what day was that? Tuesday, I helped organize and host Zoran's arts and culture team and a fundraiser, for his transition. And I mean, it's just wild. Like, we're going to have a mayor who understands the power of culture. And he understands the power of culture because he used that power to get elected. So he like really, really understands it, and I don't know how it's going to play out, but I know that maybe for the first time in the history of New York, the arts are going to be supported in the way that I know they can be supported because I'm Danish and I see how arts are supported.
Yes.
How are they supported there?
They're funded.
Yeah.
They're funded by the government
Yes.
because the government there understands the power of art and culture and that's how you build movements, and that's how you spread messaging, and that's how, it's a form of truth telling that can be propagandized, of course, but not in the same way like that the news can. And that I just think it's like as an organizer, it's the tool I rely on the most.
Do you think there's a
And
possibility to reach the heights of something like the old WPA programs of the past? Or
I mean, in New York, yeah. I mean, I think that's where Zoran's campaign is taking their cues from, if I understand it correctly, which I think I do. And that's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. But, I just know we formed this chorus in my living room 9 years ago, and we're still, it's one of the things I'm most proud of, and I've worked on so many, I feel like I've worked on every issue there is probably at this point, because they're all connected.
how can people find out more about your chorus?
The resistance revival. I mean, you guys are
Yeah.
actually hitting it. I mean, really, every year and every other booking is so profoundly like it's ramping up each time. So again, once again, this is Sarah continuing since the pink hat era. Just, I mean, like hotcakes. So I just want to say that. But yes, how can we really participate and be patrons and support?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, first of all, one thing the chorus did, like, we were very, it's one of the things I think we've been most intentional around building. And so right away, one of the first things we did after forming was create a toolkit that exists on our website. So anybody anywhere can start a resistance revival chorus.
And your website
I
is?
think there's countless factions of resistance revival choruses internationally and all over the country. And, when they reach out to us, we try to be as present and mentoring as we can because we've done this for 9 years. And I think, as we all know, like one of the hardest things you can do is keep a big group of people together, and it hasn't been without its pitfalls. But we're doing it, and we have a real foundational group of women and femmes and non-binary people and trans women who have stuck with it. And then, there's people who are cycling in and out, and the door's always open. So there's always around 70 of us, and sometimes
That is a big
like
group.
yesterday, like 6 of us showed up for a protest, and sometimes 40 of us show up for a protest or a event. It just depends.
And what is
We're
that
called the
website?
Yeah, sorry. I'm so bad at that. Okay, we're called the Resistance Revival Chorus. We have an album, This Joy, that's out on all the streaming platforms. We are on Instagram I think it's just at Resistance Revival Chorus. We have a Facebook page. We have a website. We're on all the tweets and the Twitters and whatever they're all called now. And, mostly we're trying to fundraise to to record a new album. And another thing I'm really proud of about this group is, for the most part, it's comprised of working musicians, which we know has only gotten harder since the times when Judy and I met. And by the way, Lars Ulrich was right, and everyone who was mean to him of
Right.
Napster,
Property.
because that was at the time I was like, oh my God, it's so embarrassing.
Yes.
And now I'm like, oh, my Danish brother was right.
Yes.
And they were right.
Yes.
So, one thing we are able to do is pay the people who need to be paid. Not a lot, but enough for some people to like make rent every month. And that's just such a gift.
Such a gift. It's such a
it's such a gift.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we just would love if anyone wanted to fund our album.
Absolutely.
But aside from that, like, just be in community, learn the songs, start your own chorus. It's so powerful, and it's such a powerful way to spread a message with a lot of joy. And the thing that I've learned about singing, specifically in groups of people, we ended up building a whole voter safety program at Working Families Party out of it called Joy to the Polls, because what we found was music, which is the heart of Judy's and my story, is it de-escalates tension. It's a natural tension de-escalator. When people dance together or sing together, their heartbeats align, it calms your nervous system. It is vulnerable to sing with other people. And so it builds immediate community. And it's, and then I was researching recently, Judy, I'm really doing all the talking. So
I love it. No,
shut up whenever you want to.
I'm remembering. So
we do want to hear this. And we have been talking for almost an hour though now. So I'd like you to continue, Sarah.
Yes,
and then
well, I'm going to wrap
Judy,
it up
maybe
with this.
You could give our final questions or observance about our conversation.
Easily, yes.
I'm going to wrap it up by saying, like, one really great thing that I was able to do this year for me, because I was telling Judy, like, one funky thing that came out of the Women's March was just sort of, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it, sort of this idea that, like, white women should keep their mouths shut. And while that was, like, important at the time, I kind of think, like, we've passed that phase. And, being Danish, you're sort of taught not to center yourself. So it was very easy for me to, like, fall into that role. But, like Judy says, like, I've got stories to tell. And one of them that I've really been sitting on for a long time is that my great-grandfather was the first working class prime minister of Denmark, and he brought democratic socialism to Denmark, and he in a lot of ways led the resistance against the Nazis. And something that people don't really know is that Denmark was the only European country to wholeheartedly, full-throatedly resist Nazism and successfully protect 99% of the Jewish population in Denmark. And I had been told stories about this my whole life without really understanding what the process was. And I decided to research that after Trump won again in November. And through this research, I stumbled on this whole blueprint of how to fight fascism, because history has all the lessons for us if we're willing to look at it. And, so much of that had to do with democratic socialism, because the reason Danish people were able to all be on the same page in this really unified and, there's just intense solidarity. And not across the board, but the majority of people. I really think was because democratic socialism is a moral structure. And the moral structure is that it is our responsibility to care for each other. And we don't have that structure here. And so it might be harder to replicate. But what I learned was, and then I'm done, is like this cool thing happened. For example, this Danish kid who was 17 wrote the 10 Commandments of Danish defiance. And they were just like this simple list, like I said, a moral structure that people could refer back to. And there's a reason why, experts on fascism always say, write down everything that, like, what's your line in the sand? What is your moral compass? Don't cross that, and remember what it is. So this kid wrote them down, and then he wrote it out on a piece of paper, and then other people wrote them out on pieces of paper, and then everyone had them all of a sudden, and it went viral. And so then a group of us were like, well, shit, let's do 10 commandments for now. So we're about
Wow.
to be pushing those out. Another one other thing that happened,
That's
I was
such a
rereading.
powerful story. I mean,
Yeah.
because my mother is Dutch, and the stories I heard were quite different, you know? And to compare that to, like, the experience of the Dutch hunger winter and to understand where those paths diverged and
Mm,
maybe what could have been or might have been is really quite tragic to contemplate, you know? So
yeah.
that's
I
really a
mean,
powerful story.
and the last part of that story, which to me is, I'm seeing it play out with ICE in the best way, and which is, I was rereading Eichmann in Jerusalem because that's where we're at right now.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I hadn't remembered there's a whole chapter on Denmark and what they did during World War II. And, and for Hannah Arendt, she said, I hope that the Danish exception is something that's taught in every history class, and it's not.
Mm, yeah.
And what she found, aside from all the things that we know, what she found was that, because Denmark was occupied, there were thousands of Nazi soldiers in Denmark. And because the populace was prepped for this, they just made fun of these people. They held a moral mirror to them and said, how are you living with yourself? And over time, not all of them, but a lot of them started questioning what they were doing and stopped following, the Third Reich's orders. And to the extent that it was actually a German Nazi soldier who leaked, when they were going to start rounding up Jewish people in Denmark, leaked it to the government, leaked it to the synagogues, to the churches, to anybody that they could find. And that was how everybody had,
Mm.
a few hours of time to get this, unbelievable, I don't even know what you would call it,
Response, I guess.
response, which
Yeah.
was like everybody with a boat. It was sailors, it was the Navy, the police had already turned against the Nazis, everybody who had a boat brought their boats to whatever harbors, and people would find ways to get, Jewish families to the ports, and they would sail them to Sweden, where the Danish government had made an agreement with the Swedish government, and they had jobs and they were welcomed as Swedes until they could return to Denmark. And, that's like the legacy of my great grandfather, was that from jump, he said, we reject the idea that there's no Jewish problem. We have citizens, and Jewish people are citizens, or whatever, part of our, even if they weren't citizens, part of the fabric of this country. There's no Jewish problem. We reject it. We're not doing it. And the answer is no, period.
Yes.
And so,
Mm.
you know,
Such a principle of, guidance and spirituality, honestly. And it's something that I feel like more welcomed in my seminars when I'm speaking to young ones. I'm really speaking of your origin stories, of all of our mark and our traditional mark in life. How what carried us through really difficult times, from deportation and being refugees of violence, or whatever the terms were at the time. Now we don't get to
mhm,
have refugees, but the heart and the line drawn in the ground. I'm hold my line. That's also been oftentimes lost. But there are
mhm,
some pockets in humanity where people have not had any disruption, any arrest in their principles, and I love the Danish. And that, you bring up Lars, and if you remember, Lars Ulrich is unapologetically, political, and when he is very progressive, will not yield. And that was one,
mm-mm.
property, intellectual property. Are you kidding? That's mine.
Yeah.
And he's fighting for everyone. And
Mhm.
and a wonderful thing about the Danes also is, are not as invested in monetizing your ideas. I mean, it's for free. Please, here, come, replicate, and spread it about. And that too is part of your work with the choir. Is it's such an amazing organizing tool as a cultural
Mm-hmm.
art. So I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, the continuity, and I want to say the continuity. So that's what draws me to just about any organizer out there right now, because our children, our daughters, are really scrutinizing our sons are scrutinizing our selections, our choices, our where we dive into origin stories and bring forth. They've seen some tyranny. They've seen genocide in the face
Mm-hmm.
of humanity. So,
Mm-hmm.
how can we walk forward and not address that with our children now and receive them with that woven story prepared to hold them? So, thank goodness for Grandpa and Grandma and their
Great grandfather.
great
Yeah.
great grandpa, me too, my great grandma. They held the line, and somehow we got a little bit of that in us. And so I
Or a
just want
lot.
a lot. I do want to say that Sarah has worked in reproductive rights through the most dangerous waves of violence against women in this country, in pockets of this country, continues, and is
Mm-hmm.
frontline organizer, and in areas that have been really difficult and challenging for women of color. So thank you for your work, for continuing it and keeping it alive.
I couldn't do it any other way. And honestly, it's like without it, there is no reproductive rights movement without women of color, because they framed reproductive justice, and that's like the only kind of organizing I'm interested in.
This has
Wow.
been an incredible hour of conversation.
I really overtalked.
No, and actually, I have one more request of you, which I've been doing with all our guests, which is to put you a little on the spot and ask you to either improvise or just say something with the phrase "listen and be heard."
Listen and be heard. I mean, I think the listen part is what I would like to underscore. I think a lot of people are being heard, but I don't think everybody knows how to listen. And, if anyone has been inspired by, what's been going on in New York with Mamdani, yesterday, and I really worry about that kid because I'm like, please go take a nap. But he did a 12-hour listening tour of New York yesterday, where basically there were 12 hours of slots that everyone from every borough could sign up for. And I don't remember how many minutes they got with him, but he listened, and he just listened. And when I think about what's lacking in leadership, it's listening. So yeah, it's important to be heard, but it's more important to listen, because if you want to be heard, you're going to be heard in a much more wholesome and sort of inclusive way if you listen first. And I would say that, for white organizers, specifically white cis women organizers, listen,
Yeah.
and listen a lot.
I want to say, Martha, that my generation, I'm older than all three of us here, and to both of you. And I know that for a fact, folks that are my generation are paying attention to what Sarah's saying right this moment, that they've not listened quietly enough in their life, and that this is a moment. I'm really feeling I'm in the company of some contemporaries who still, of course, I'm not paying attention to those who cannot. But listening also means, again, watching the movement and life way of a Sophie Flicker is a way of listening to what exactly is very informing to an older person what we need to do next. And I just want to share that with my contemporaries out there.
Yeah, but you're biased.
I just feel like
That's like, when I say that about my daughter, she's like, okay, Mom.
I know that expression, but I have been deeply listening in this past hour, and I'm so appreciative of the wisdom that you both share, and for participating in this Beyond Borders ongoing discussion. And I hope that you'll join us again sometime, Sarah.
Oh, it would be an honor. And honestly, like, Judy is the reason I'm here doing what I'm doing. So I'm embarrassed that I spoke so much. I
Oh,
think people need to hear you.
oh
But
no! This is the time where Sophie Flicker learns, and really part of our cultural codes are very strong. Mine is a sense of face, and to really sort of hold my mud, and I think that that's very much a part of your roots as well. This is the time to sort of I will be there to elevate you, my love. And so no,
thank you
no,
so
no.
much.
It's time to elevate your voice. And I just please. I'm so blessed. Thank you, Martha, for creating this.
Martha, thank you for bringing us together, because this lady's one of the most important people in my life. So.
Well, as I like to say, Listen and Be Heard Network, we are the network, and I want to thank Judy Talaugon and Sarah Sophie Flicker. My name is Martha Cinader, and we'll see you again in a couple weeks.
Thank you
Thank
both
you.
so much.